then board president, decided to form the Healing Task Force. With this action, the Cameron House Board of Directors took the bold step to acknowledge the sexual abuse perpetrated on adolescent boys in the program by a former director and a trusted pastor. The final report, written by Brad Wu, who never put his name on the report, but everybody who's read it said it's excellent, with contribution and edits from the Healing Task Force, documents the sexual abuse that occurred in this institution throughout Dick's tenure of 30 years. It is a dark period in the history of this institution, which began in 1874 as a sanctuary and refuge for Chinese women, and continues to this day to be a sanctuary for Asian women in the situations of domestic violence. The acknowledgement that this occurred and the apology offered to victims set us on a journey that none of us knew or had any inkling of its outcome. Like Abraham, we moved out in faith from the comforts of home and ventured forth into unknown terrains. We ventured forth from perceived safety and moved from the darkness of silence and denial to being able to talk about the unthinkable and the unspeakable abuse that was perpetrated by members of our community. As a community of faith and as Asian Americans, our desire was to acknowledge and affirm individual victims wounded by sexual abuse, but it was just as important to restore individuals to the community. In the Asian American context, our identity is defined by our place and our role in the social groups to whom we belong. Hence, we looked at not only healing individual victims, but also the community in which the sexual abuse occurred. This has been proven to be mutually beneficial. Trauma research now affirms that an important step for healing victims is restoring the victims to their communities. When I first started with the Healing Task Force, I had a sense that we were way in above our heads. When we looked around for resources to see what others were doing in this arena, we could not find anything on the internet or in the church denominations, whether it was Protestant or Catholic. I think since then, there are probably a lot of things on the website, but when we started 7 years ago, there was hardly anything. We finally came to the workshop format as a way of providing a place where victims and the community could come together and talk about the unthinkable and the unspeakable secret that had plagued our communities for decades. The other issue was what, if anything, could or should we say to victims? Our experience bears out the story I would like to share. And this story comes from, it's a set of collection of stories called My Grandfather's Blessing. And interestingly enough, Dr. Rachel Raymond is a cancer support specialist who actually meets at Commonweal, where our survivors have met for retreats. So it's an interesting way of how we are connected to healing in many different ways. Yeah. Oh, you met her? Wow. Yeah, her books are great. Anyhow, she shares the story of a colleague, a psychotherapist who in 1980 attended a Jungian conference in New York. And they saw videos and films, and there was a special panelist of two of the heads of the largest Jungian Institute and Carl Jung's grandson who was on this panel. And they would respond to questions posed on a card. Then they heard this story on one card where the story was a person recounting recurring dreams that occurred in which the dreamer was stripped of all human dignity and worth through Nazi atrocities. As her colleague listened, this woman began to formulate a response to the dream and the response to the different symbols that she saw or heard in the dream. And to her surprise, instead of responding to the dream presented, when the reading was over, Carl Jung's grandson asked the group audience, which was huge, it's probably hundreds of people, to please stand and have a moment of silence. And she just presumed that after this moment of silence that they would do what they had been doing, which was responding to these dreams. When the audience sat down, instead of responding or providing an interpretation to the dream, the panelists went on to the next card. Now this troubled this woman named Lisa greatly because she couldn't understand why they wouldn't respond to this, until she bumped into a professor of hers that was a well-known psychoanalyst in New York. And this was his response to her perception of that nothing happened. And he said, "Lois, there is in life a suffering so unspeakable, a vulnerability so extreme that it goes far beyond words, beyond explanations, and even beyond healing. In the face of such suffering, all we can do is bear witness, so no one needs to suffer alone." So this story pretty much reminds me of what we have been doing. Our willingness to face such shared vulnerability, I think, gives us a capacity to repair the world. And I believe in our case, to repair this community, which began to hear the stories, affirm the stories, and affirm the victims. And that has set us on a journey of healing as travelers on the same road seeking health and wholeness.